Why hello there, and welcome back to Let's Make Us a Character. And the final entry in the Gamma World series, Ultimo Mondo Gamma, Gamma World 7th edition. Which conveniently also happens to be one that doesn't require any backstory. I don't need to tell you about corporate mismanagement, obscure science fiction role-playing games, or the imprints that White Wolf used to publish D20 system products. No, 7th edition, also commonly referred to by its official title, D&D Gamma World, is simply a game published by Wizards of the Coast in 2010 using the D&D 4th edition system. Technically making it the first and only edition of Gamma World to actually be specifically linked to Dungeons and Dragons, and returned to the box set format containing a 160-page digest-sized rulebook, 2 double-sided maps, 2 sheets of cardstock tokens, 4 character sheets, something else that I will be spending a lot of time discussing later, and most notably, not dice. Like, the absolute gall to put out a $40 box set, and instead of throwing a few cents worth of plastic in, just telling people to buy the official Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game dice set for $12.99. When all of the previous box sets from TSR were somehow able to include dice, as was the $20 D&D starter set. Like, the whole point of a box set is that it is a single thing you can purchase that contains everything you need to play the game. If you are not going to include everything you need to play the game, then why are you doing a box set? And boy howdy do I wish I could say this was the biggest anchor that the Wizards tied around this game's neck before shoving it in the deep end. Anyway, 7th edition was further supported by 2 more box sets, 1 print and 2 digital free adventure modules, and a free rules supplement of vehicle rules, which were of course absent in the core rules despite a not insignificant chance of starting with a pickup truck. And before I begin, there is one more thing I want to discuss, because it was a major criticism a lot of people had at the time, myself included. Every previous edition of Gamma World is set in the aftermath of some great war. The causes, involved parties, and technology used in that war change from edition to edition, but the important aspect, as with most post-apocalyptic fiction, is that it was our fault. Us maniacs, we blew it up. But this edition is set 150 years after The Big Mistake, which is just an accident involving the Large Hadron Collider that converged many possible universes into one. And that completely takes the impact out of the setting. It is a post-apocalypse with no meaningful apocalypse. The result of an unfortunate accident, an oopsie, nobody's fault, and certainly not the intentional actions of entire nations bringing about mutually assured destruction. Because that would be sad, I guess, and also, critical of extremely pro-war societies, like the one we live in. The entire point of the post-apocalyptic genre. Which, in addition to helping them avoid taking the radical stance that war might be bad, also means that they don't explain the existence of anything. Everything simply exists because it existed in an alternate reality. But hey, there's still plenty more to complain about later, so for now, let's make us a D&D Gamma World character. Character creation is a simple 7-step process. So, step 1, roll your character's origin. If you've heard anything good about this game, it's probably the character origins, which are kind of like genotypes from previous editions, but also kind of like mutations. Essentially, it is one category for all of the things that are inherent to your character. The core book provides 20 origins: android, cockroach, doppelganger, electrokinetic, empath, felinoid, giant, gravity controller, hawkoid, hypercognitive, mind breaker, mind coercer, plant, pyrokinetic, radioactive, rat swarm, seismic, speedster, telekinetic, and yeti. And we rolled 2 of those and then just kinda smush them together into whatever concept we think of. So if we rolled felinoid and android, we could be some kind of sexy robot catgirl, or an animatronic smilodon from a prehistoric education park. If we rolled rat swarm and plant, we could be a swarm of little plant creatures, or like a sentient parasitic fungus infecting a bunch of rats. Of course, they're not all going to be that interesting. Like, empath and telekinetic is pretty much just going to be someone with those 2 powers. And this is actually the intended way to interpret your origins. Like, creatively figuring out a way to put them together is encouraged, and it really hurts me to admit that Wizards of the Coast, of all people, actually published a game with character creation that encourages creativity significantly more than most other games I see. Combining multiple character attributes into one thing and then encouraging you to combine 2 of them in an interesting way gives you way more options and leeway to come up with something interesting than a standard race/class combination. And there is actually a secret 21st origin, Engineered Human, which is only accessible by rolling the same origin twice, which, if you are not great at the math, does work out to the same odds as any other origin. And this is essentially the pure strain human option, except that here it is specifically stated that they are the descendants of genetically engineered supermen. But an engineered human does still have a second, or rather first origin, which the book says to re-theme the abilities of as technology, special skills, or just superior abilities. Once again, actually encouraging you to take what they give you and then interpret it in a creative way. So let's get to rolling? However, since this is the last Gamma World video, why don't we get extra wacky with it? Because Famine in Fargo adds 20 more origins, and then Legion of Gold, another 8, as well as a system for randomly determining which tables to randomly roll on, which does fail to take into consideration the fact that you could also just roll a d48, because the big publishers really don't like giving you interesting things to do with the dice. But I do, so let's roll those d48s, and Reanimated and Exploding. And as a Reanimated, we are Dark type, gain the Undead Recuperation ability, which grants immunity to disease and lets us regain hit points equal to our level at the start of each turn in which we have at least 1 hit point, as well as the Slow penalty, which reduces our speed by 1, and we gain the Nasty Bite at-will attack power, as well as some other things that I will discuss when they come up. Then, as an Exploding, we do not get the benefit of the origin's Psi type. You only gain the type benefit of your first origin, but do gain the Fireworks ability, which deals 3 fire and sonic damage to any creature that ends its turn adjacent to us while bloodied, which is half or fewer hit points. And the Controlled Demolition at-will attack power, and then of course also other stuff that I will get to when it's relevant. Also, each origin provides some appearance notes, but a lot of those do kind of assume that your other origin is going to give you more to go on, so aren't that helpful. But on to Step 2, Assign Ability Scores. As this is essentially Dungeons & Dragons, we have, you guessed it, Strength, Constitution, Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. But things are done a little differently. Each origin has a primary ability, in our case, Strength for Reanimated and Constitution for Exploding. And we get 18 in the primary ability of our first origin, and 16 in the second, and then just roll 3d6 for the rest. And then apply the ability modifiers as normal. And notably, if our first and second origins had the same primary ability, we would instead get a 20 in that ability score. But now on to Step 3, Determine Skills. We have 10 skills, and each of our origins grants a +4 bonus to 1. So we get +4 to athletics from our reanimated origin, and +4 to athletics from our exploding origin. It is specified that these do stack. And then we also get +4 to 1 random skill and stealth, which is an impressive skill for an exploding zombie. Then we add the relevant ability modifiers and our entire level, and those are our skill bonuses. So on to step 4, gear up. Rather than getting funds to buy equipment like, in a normal game, we just get to select armor, 1 melee weapon, and 1 ranged weapon. And basically, instead of having various costs, equipment just has pros and cons. So we can have light armor that has a +3 armor class bonus, or heavy armor that has a +7 bonus at the cost of -1 to speed, and shields grant an additional +1 at the cost of using one of your arms. And we've already taken -1 to speed, so let's just go with light armor. And then we have light and heavy melee and ranged weapons, which have varying ranges, damage, accuracy, and use different ability scores. So basically, the light weapons deal less damage, but make up for it by having a higher accuracy bonus. Light weapons use the higher of dexterity or intelligence, and heavy weapons use the higher of strength or constitution. And our strength modifier is +4, constitution +3, dexterity +0, and intelligence -1. So we would get +4 to attacks and damage with heavy weapons, and +0 with light weapons. All weapons. Using a two-handed light weapon uses dexterity, and a one-handed heavy gun uses strength. And this brings up an overall issue that D&D 4th edition had that is actually worse in this game, where basically you have one-stat characters. Like, if you roll any strength, con, dex, or int origin first, you are going to have +4 to all of your weapon attacks and damage. But if you roll wisdom and or charisma origins, I hope you have good origin powers, because those are all you'll have unless you happen to also roll good in one of your useful stats. So obviously we are going to go with heavy weapons, and let's go with two-handed melee and one-handed range. And then, like a lot of other stuff here, we just get to decide what we want those weapons to be. So let's say we have a sledgehammer wrapped in barbed wire, and a sack of throwable rocks, because ranged weapons work weirdly here. Aside from guns, there is no distinction between a thrown and propelled weapon, stating only that ranged weapons are ones you throw at your enemy or that launches an easily crafted or easily collected projectile, with no mechanical distinction between a hand crossbow and a throwing knife, as long as they are both light one-handed ranged weapons, despite the significant thematic difference that one needs to be retrieved before being thrown again, and the other reloaded, but neither of those are factored into the mechanics, because it is specifically stated that non-gun ranged weapons do not require ammunition. So mechanically, you basically just have infinite ammo for everything other than a gun, which I guess also means infinite thrown weapons? Another thing that I point out specifically because I guarantee it was a point of contention at many tables, because even in D&D 4th edition, if you throw a non-magical weapon, you no longer have that weapon in your possession. You cannot have your dagger and throw it. Which is why I picked a thrown weapon that I could reasonably have an infinite supply of. Rocks. And just in case you were wondering about those ammunition rules, basically ammo is not tracked individually. You either have ammo or you don't, and you can use a gun once per encounter without exhausting your ammunition. But if you use it more than once, you have exhausted your ammunition at the end of the encounter and have to find more, making the usefulness of guns largely dependent on the leniency of your GM in regards to how easy it is to find ammo. Because there is no monetary system in this game, there is no abstract wealth value. items do not have prices. Availability of everything is solely at the GM's discretion, which is either a very respectable decision and taking a major step in separating this game from D&D, or a lazy one because it cut out a massive amount of work for the designers and just makes it someone else's responsibility. Anyway, we also get an Explorer's Kit and 1d4 plus 1 items from the starting gear table, and pickup truck, laptop computer, and water purifier. Which might sound cool, but it doesn't specify if the truck comes with fuel, if so how much, or how much fuel it holds, only that it gets 10 miles per gallon. And as mentioned earlier, there aren't really any vehicle rules, and the availability and cost of fuel are entirely up to the GM. So a pickup truck could be really useful, or completely useless. And we can carry a number of pounds of equipment equal to our strength times 10, so 180 pounds, and can lift twice that much and push or drag 5 times that much. However, remember when I said that the items didn't really have prices or anything? Well, that includes weights, so I guess on to step 5, fill in the numbers. Where we fill in the numbers. So we gain 12 plus Constitution score hit points, 28, and have a bloodied value equal to half that, so 14. You no longer get healing surges, but do still have a second wind, which now heals for your bloodied value instead of half your bloodied value. So while healing is less common, you now never have to say, "Oh no, I can't be healed because I am out of healing surges." And if you're wondering how this affects healing outside of combat, you now regain all hit points during a short rest, which, considering that daily powers aren't a thing in this game, means that short and long rests provide almost the exact same benefits now. Our Fortitude defense is equal to 10 plus our level, plus the better of Strength or Constitution, plus 1 from our Exploding Origin for 16 overall. Then Reflex, which is the same but the better of Dexterity or Intelligence, so 11. And Will, with the better of Wisdom or Charisma, and another plus 1 from Exploding, so 12 overall. Then Armor class, which is equal to 10, plus our level, plus armor and shield bonuses, which remember is 3, then the better of Dexterity or Intelligence modifier if wearing light or no armor, which unfortunately is plus 0, so 14 overall. Then our speed is 5, base of 6, minus 1 for the reanimated origin, and just to reiterate, heavy armor would have reduced that to 4, which is why I went with the light armor despite having no dex or intelligence bonus. Positioning is going to be kind of important for this character. Our initiative bonus is equal to our dexterity modifier, plus level, and any other miscellaneous modifiers we may have, which we do not, so plus 1. And then attack bonuses, so for our heavy weapons, we use the better of Strength or Constitution, plus our level, plus the accuracy bonuses for the weapons, which are plus 2 for all heavy weapons, so plus 7 for both, with 2d8 plus strength modifier plus level damage with the sledgehammer, and 1d10 plus strength modifier and level for the rocks. And then our attack powers are the relevant ability modifier, strength and con respectively, plus our level, so plus 5 and 4, and I will explain more about those later. And we already did skill bonuses, so now that we have all of the numbers, another change from D&D 4th edition that you might have noticed, adding your entire level to pretty much everything, versus D&D 4th edition where you added half your level to almost everything. The big addition being adding level, or double your level in some cases, to damage. Weirdly enough though, this is actually an improvement over 4th edition, because while enemy attacks and defenses more or less scale equal to yours, damage does not scale proportionally to hit points. That's why higher level 4th edition encounters would take hours of chipping away at an enemy's hundreds of hit points until the DM realized that if they didn't start fudging the numbers, there wasn't going to be time for anything else in the session. So adding your level to damage is a way to deal with excessive hit point growth. It's not the correct way, but it is a way. Although it also means that things like dealing 3 damage to adjacent creatures quickly becomes useless for anything other than taking out minions. But now on to Step 6. Add role-playing character details. You know, name, personality, background, all that stuff. And they do put a little bit of effort into helping you with that. And if this were the last step, I would be saying that this game is pretty okay. A few issues, but certainly not one of the most egregious things Wizards of the Coast has ever done, which, you know, is a very long list. But no, unfortunately, we need to talk about the main thing you have likely heard about this game, and the reason why you should be very glad that it failed. Step 7. Draw Alpha Mutation and Omega Tech. So remember when I said there was something else in the box? That something else is a deck of 40 Alpha Mutation and 40 Omega Tech cards, and we draw one of each. So, Teleportation and Flash Neurojack. And I will explain both of those later, but for now, you might be questioning, what's so bad about that? Lots of shitty RPG box sets from lots of shitty companies use cards. What makes this particular version more offensively anti-consumer than something like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd Edition? And the answer to that is one simple hyphenated word: deck building. Yes, the box set contains 2 40-card decks, which are all you really need to play, but it's also encouraged that each player build their own decks from booster packs, which contained an additional 120 cards in the initial and fortunately only set. And yes, you don't need to build your own deck. You can just use the GM's decks that are included in the box. But doing so is obviously going to be advantageous since you can select cards specifically tailored to your character, and of course have access to all of the new and more powerful cards when they come out in future sets. It's even built into the mechanics that drawing from the GM's deck is worse than your own. When you find an item, you roll a d20, and if the result is 9 or lower, you have to draw from the GM's deck. That is a penalty for rolling low, and also a default penalty for not having your own deck. It is clear that having your own deck is supposed to be an advantage over the players who do not. Although I will say, if nothing else, this does finally get rid of the artifact identification system. And that was the vision for this game. Every single player buying pack after pack of cards to get the newest, rarest, and most powerful mutations and equipment, instead of one player buying the core rulebooks and maybe an occasional supplement, and everyone else just freeloading. They even added a 3rd kind of card in Famine and Fargo. Cards were really clearly supposed to be the big infinite revenue stream for this game. Or, you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this was actually a creative decision. Maybe they genuinely thought this was going to provide a better gameplay experience than just providing convenient, accessible content in the book that you can just use. And nah, this is Wizards of the Coast we're talking about. Publishers of Magic the Gathering. They know how profitable cards are. The only thing they were trying to add to the game was an addictive and exploitative monetization system, which fortunately they were too dumb to implement in a worthwhile way. Like, remember how I said you should be glad this failed? Well, this was the Wizards' test run for grafting a collectible card game monetization onto a tabletop role-playing game. And if it had been successful, I guarantee that the next incarnation of Dungeons & Dragons would have been sold one booster pack at a time. Anyway, despite that unpleasantness, this character is done. So, as mentioned, this is basically D&D 4th edition, so the rules are largely the same. So let's say that we wanted to scale the side of a building. That would be a moderate athletics check, which has a DC of 13. So we roll a d20 and add our athletics bonus, which, just to reiterate, is our level, 1, plus 4 from our strength, and another plus 4 each from our reanimated and exploding origins, so plus 13 total. So kind of obviously a success. And this is the first actual mechanical element of the game that I have a serious complaint about. With few exceptions, all skill check DCs are just easy, moderate, or difficult, which is actually good in theory. However, for reasons that cannot possibly be logical, the DCs seem to increase based on character level, specifically going up 1 per level, which basically just cancels out the level bonus that you add to skill checks. But unlike attacks and defenses, here it is very clearly laid out what's going on in a nice little table. And the closest thing to a reasonable explanation I can imagine is that they were for some reason mandated to have the same modifiers apply to defenses, attacks, and skills, because that's how it works in D&D, and it's supposed to be the same system, so they had to then remove the level modifiers via this shifting difficulty class. Although admittedly, that is just an assumption. It never actually says that you increase the DC based on character level, or why there's a character level column on the DC table at all, or why there's a DC table in the first place when there are only 3 choices: easy, moderate, or hard. This just comes the closest to making sense based on what is provided. But now let's move on to combat, which, being the sole focus of D&D 4th edition, should probably be better. So let's say that we have encountered a Porker Marauder and a few shield bots. First, everyone rolls initiative, and oh, look at that, we go first. How convenient. So let's pull up our Alpha Mutation card, and that lets us teleport 10 squares as a move action, or expend the power to teleport 1,000 squares. We also have the option to overcharge the power, rolling a d20 and on a result of 10 or higher, being able to teleport creatures within 5 squares as well, and on a 9 or lower, teleport 1d6 squares in a random direction at the start of each turn for the remainder of the encounter. And if the type of the power matched the type of our first origin, we would get a +2 bonus to that roll. But let's just use the standard benefit, teleporting into the middle of the action and using Controlled Demolition from our exploding origin, which is a close burst 2, meaning that it attacks all creatures within 2 squares of our characters. And diagonals are not treated as extra distance, so just a 5x5 area centered on us. And look at that! All of the enemies are in range. How nice. So we roll a d20 for each target, +3 for our constitution, and 1 for level, versus reflex. And just for a bit of explanation on defenses, in 3rd or 5th edition D&D, this attack would have a DC, and the targets would roll a reflex or dexterity save against it. But in 4th edition, and therefore here, that's just reversed, so you roll for the effect against the target's reflex defense. Basically, it's just who rolls and who takes a 10 is swapped, which you can also easily do yourself if you prefer one system or the other. So we hit the Porker and 2 of the shield bots. The Porker takes 1d6 plus Constitution modifier and level, so 9, fire and sonic damage, and is pushed 1 square. And the 2 shield bots are just destroyed because they were minions and as such only have 1 hit point each, which is honestly one of the best features of 4th edition. And that is our turn, so next the remaining shield bot moves in and attacks with its Electro Jolt, making an attack versus our reflex, which is 11 and therefore very easy to hit, and that just does a straight up 9 electricity damage. Then the Porker Marauder also moves in and attacks with its flail, which is a melee weapon attack with a +6 bonus versus our armor class of 14 and misses. So round 2, and we retain the same initiative order, so we go first, regaining hit points equal to our level thanks to our reanimated origin, and this is also probably a good time to pull out our Flash Neurojack, which can be used once per encounter as a minor action to grant a +1 bonus to speed, and an extra standard action for 1 round. Then we take to sledging the shield bot, since we know that it's a minion and will definitely go down in a single hit, rolling +7 versus the shield bot's AC, and a hit, but we don't really need to roll damage because, as mentioned, 1 hit point. Then we turn to the Porker and get into the difference between powers and weapon attacks. So our Sledgehammer gets +7 to attack and deals 2d8 +5 damage, and Nasty Bite gets +5 to attack and deals 2d6 +6 damage. At level 3, Nasty Bite will actually deal more damage thanks to adding twice our level, but for now the big difference, aside from that healing crit, is that the weapon attack targets AC and the Nasty Bite targets Fortitude. So while Nasty Bite does not get the weapon accuracy bonus, it also doesn't have to contend with the target's armor bonus, and Fortitude is going to be based on strength or constitution rather than dexterity or intelligence. So it is a thing where it is very conditional which attack is going to be better. But whatever, this is just an example, so let's go with Nasty Bite, which hits for 12 damage. And then the Porker retaliates with its flail, hitting for 8 damage and pushing us 1 square, then shifting into the vacated space. And we are now bloodied, which means that the Porker takes 3 fire and sonic damage for ending its turn adjacent to us thanks to our exploding origin. And round 3, we regain 1 hit point, and let's just put that Porker out of its misery with our Sledgehammer, hitting for 13 damage, and it is very dead. And now that the encounter is over, 2 things happen. We discard our Alpha Mutation card, or cards if we had more than one, and draw new ones, so we now have Kinetic Absorption. Until the end of the next encounter. Whether we use them or not, these refresh at the end of every encounter. And since we used our Omega Tech item, we also need to make an Omega Charge check to see if we have depleted the item's charge. Rolling a d20, and since the result was under 10, we have depleted the charge and discard the item. And while obviously I do not like the cards because they were just added to try and squeeze extra money out of the customers, I also don't really like how they function. Like, you can very easily end up wasting a good mutation on a 1-round encounter, or going into a boss fight with something you literally cannot use, because a lot of the mutations are very conditional. Like, being able to turn a psychic attack back on the attacker is a great ability if you happen to take psychic damage during one of the encounters when you happen to have that mutation. Anti-Life Leech is amazing if you just happen to be fighting enemies with Life Leech, of which there are only like 4 in the entire game. In previous editions, these very specific conditional mutations were still viable because you had them all the time. Anti-Life Leech wasn't going to come up a lot, but you are fairly likely to come across someone with Life Leech at some point, and when you did, you would still have the ability. But here, you are incredibly unlikely to have one of these powers when it's actually usable. Like, even if you do build your own deck with the most advantageous cards, at best you're going to have like a 28% chance of having the specific mutation you want when you need it. Or more likely a 100% chance because you just wouldn't include any of those highly conditional cards. And overall, it just seems like a system that would be more and more frustrating every time you have to discard a mutation without even having a chance to use it. And then, just like D&D 4th edition, advancement isn't very interesting here because all characters advance in the exact same way, so let's just go through it. At every level, we gain 5 hit points. At 2nd, one of the 2 critical hit benefits from our origins. At 3rd, one of the 2 utility powers from our origins. At 4th, 2 alpha mutations at once. At 5th, the expert power from one of our origins. At 6th, the other critical hit benefit. At 7th, the other utility power. At 8th, a 3rd alpha mutation. At 9th, the other expert power. And at 10th, an Uber feature, which is either an additional encounter use of one of our expert powers, an automatic success on 1 Omega charge check per encounter, or the ability to retain a single alpha mutation at the end of an encounter. And also, if you were using the optional vocation rules from Legion of Gold, you get a feat at levels 4, 7, and 10. So, as I said, nothing that interesting in the advancement. And that was a D&D Gamma World character, the 7thest and final edition of Gamma World. A game that, as weird as it is to say, is significantly less offensive now that it's dead. Any threat it posed neutralized by its failure. And as a harmless historical artifact, it's okay. It's not something I would want to play every week, but occasionally, yeah, it could be fun. In a lot of ways, it's like D&D 4th edition turned up to 11, both good and bad aspects. 4th edition introduced a lot of board game and Morpig style elements that didn't really fit with D&D, but here it feels much more like they took the mechanics and tried to design an experience around it. It's big, flashy, and hard-hitting. Your character is likely to die, but that's just part of the game, which is supported by the ease of character creation. Like, without rushing, I was able to roll up a second character in under 8 minutes. So, if my exploding zombie dies, I might be a little bummed, but I'm not dreading the experience of having to make a new character like I would with D&D or, I don't know, GURPS or something like that. Honestly, it is a better application of the D&D 4th edition rules than D&D 4th edition. And excluding the baby's first post-apocalypse element, it probably does the best job of capturing the spirit of Gamma World of any post-TSR edition. And it's really sad to see Gamma World end with a promising edition with lots of fun ideas essentially being sacrificed as an experiment in forcing an unwanted CCG element into a role-playing game. And even once you look past the cards, there's a lot to suggest that the game was made rather hastily. No wealth system, no weights for items despite having a specified carrying capacity, the mess that is the DCs for skill checks, the lack of specification in the ranged weapon rules, inconsistencies like saying in one section that alpha mutations are refreshed during a short or extended rest, and in another that they are refreshed at the end of an encounter and reshuffled or rebuilt during an extended rest. Feats not being added until the final expansion. Vehicle rules not being added until after the final expansion. All of these things have a distinct put down your pencils and turn in the game feeling to them. And just generally cheap production value, like reusing art and content from D&D, and much more hilariously, other Gamma World 7th edition books, which, remember, there were only 3. And I don't mean a few pieces of spot art, I mean multiple full-page illustrations are reused across the, once again, 3 books. Overall, it's just a very weird release because it seemed like they were planning for this to be a big, long-running series. They even commissioned 2 novels for it, but then also canceled it within 5 months. That second novel didn't even come out until another 5 months after Legion of Gold, a point where I must assume they were expecting to still be making Gamma World products. So I think the question is, why did it fail so spectacularly? Well, I think it's a pretty perfect example of what happens when a company transitions from making products to making profits, and the people making the decisions are no longer ones that actually know anything about the company's products or customers. This game shows an impressive lack of understanding of why people play role-playing games, and even more so, why people play collectible card games. Like, Magic the Gathering et al. Works because that's the entire game. You buy cards and build a deck which you can customize based on various play styles and strategies. Then you go and compete against other players and their decks. The cards make up the entire experience, which makes them worth buying. Here, the cards are a fairly minor part of the overall experience, and a cumbersome, inconvenient one at that. The only motivation to build your own deck is making sure that you have cards you can actually use. There is no strategy involved beyond trying to minimize the inconvenience of using the cards. It is not a fun, engaging element of play, it's just something you have to deal with. Also, the cards don't even have art on them, so they're not even fun to collect and look at. And as for brand new players, telling them that they are going to need to buy a $13 set of dice to play the $40 box set, and possibly buy who knows how many $4 packs of cards, is going to turn a lot of them away. Because remember, the average tabletop curious consumer would not be seeing this at a game shop. It would be at like a Borders Books, where the official overpriced D&D dice set is likely to be the only dice on the shelf. It seems like they just kind of assumed that people were going to buy the box set for no reason, and then start buying accessories for it without giving new or existing customers any real reason to do so. And unfortunately, I don't think we will ever see Gamma World again, unless Hasbro decides to sell off all of the Wizards' non-Magic and D&D assets when they fully absorb it. Because that is the sole focus of Wizards of the Coast right now, squeezing every last cent out of D&D and Magic. And also trying to become a video game developer. Like, Legion of Gold, released February 15th, 2011, is the last non-Dungeons & Dragons role-playing product that the Wizards published. And as for the possibility of someone else licensing the IP, like they did with 6th edition, that doesn't seem likely either. Remember that the Wizards' goal is to have an audience who does not know other games exist, or are hostile towards them if they do. And even if they are getting a licensing fee from it, having another high-profile game just existing in the market is bad for the D&D or die mentality that they've been fostering for the last 20 years. And let's be real here, it's fairly unlikely that nobody has tried to license Gamma World in the last 13 years. And that is it for Gamma World. 33 years, 7 editions, some good, some bad, and one with an action table that I like to reference as a joke. But now reduced to nothing more than a festering corpse in the Wizard's basement that current management probably doesn't even know they own. And make sure to join me next time when I'll be doing something different, because there are no more Gamma Worlds to cover. Unless, they announce Gamma World 8th edition right before I put out this video, which I don't think is going to happen, but if it did happen, that would be the time that it would. And thank you for watching. If you want more of my special brand of wit and insight, you can follow me on Blue Sky, Twitter, even Tumblr. Especially Tumblr. There are links in the description. And extra special thanks to my Fight and Flail Snails, Broken Unicorn, D-Stex, Hasterfan, Randy Mulholland, Renee D, Stephen Kramer, Tila Glar, and Toshirokuro. If you'd like to be cool like them, check out my Patreon. Also, channel memberships are now a thing, so you can check those out too. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos that the dark, unseen hand of the YouTube algorithm has lovingly selected for you, which I am sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.